April 14th, 1943, Fleet Radio Unit Pacific, Pearl Harbor. The cryptographers hunched over their desks, pencils scratching as Japanese code spilled onto paper and, bit by bit, turned into English. The message, straight from the top, Commander-in-Chief, Combined Fleet, Yamamoto's inspection tour laid out with almost obsessive detail. Arrival times, airfields, the whole flight plan. Departure at 0600 Tokyo time, April 18th from Rabaul, landing at Balal Airfield by 800. They even listed the exact planes: 2 Type 1 medium bombers, 60 fighters as escort. 60! Like he was the emperor himself. Technical Sergeant Harold Fudena, a Nisei linguist, double-checked everything, eyes darting between cipher and translation. The Japanese didn't just plan, they practically sent out invitations, every detail handed over on a silver platter. Commander William Goggins ran Frupac and spotted what this meant immediately. No hesitation, he shot the intelligence up the chain to Commander Edwin Layton, the Pacific Fleet's intelligence chief. Layton took one look and, well, you could see the gears turning. Admiral Yamamoto, the mastermind behind Pearl Harbor, was about to put himself smack in reach of American fighters. One shot, that's it. They didn't know yet. But this one, intercepted message, was about to kick off the boldest fighter ambush in history. The Pacific War had taught the Americans that Japanese commanders weren't just officers, they were icons. Knock off a symbol like Yamamoto and you don't just win an air battle. You rattle the whole Japanese Navy. Yamamoto wasn't your average admiral either. Guy went to Harvard, played poker, understood the US almost as well as any American. He'd warned Tokyo not to mess with America's factories. They ignored him. He didn't want war, but once it started, he planned Pearl Harbor like a chess grandmaster. Early on, he handed the US a string of losses, almost won it all at Midway, until, American codebreakers flipped the script. Meanwhile, somewhere on Guadalcanal, a Lockheed P-38G Lightning sat on the runway, engines glinting in the heat. Those twin Allison V-1710s could push her to 414 medium force at 25,000 feet. She was a beast. Twin booms, 52-foot wingspan, 4.50 cal Brownings, and a 20-millimeter cannon, all stuffed in the nose. No weird wing convergence issues, just raw firepower. With drop tanks, she could fly over 450 miles out. No other U.S. fighter in the Pacific could touch that kind of range. Major John William Mitchell stood in the ops dugout scanning weather maps and the latest intel. He'd flown everything, logged over 2,000 hours. The problem in his head was pure math. Distance from Guadalcanal to the intercept, 435 miles if you went straight. But straight meant flying over Japanese islands, crawling with radar and spotters. The safe way? Out to sea, then north. Adds another 165 miles, 600 out, 400 back. 1,000 miles, give or take, with maybe 7 minutes of combat at full throttle before you ran dry. Fuel numbers danced in his head. P-38G had 300 gallons in the mains, 60 in reserves, plus drop tanks for another 330 total. 690 gallons. At cruise, she burned about 50 gallons per hour per engine, and at altitude, it just got worse. 5 hours, 45 minutes max if you didn't dawdle. They needed 4.5 hours minimum if navigation was perfect. If the winds cooperated, not much margin for error. One wrong turn or too much time. Dogfighting, and you were swimming home. Then there's Captain Thomas George Lanier Jr. The guy had studied the mission until he could recite it backwards. His dad was a WWI ace, tight with General Billy Mitchell. Lanier, 6 feet, broad-shouldered, walked like he owned the place. Already had 5 kills, well, depending on who you asked. He flew hard, talked big, made friends and enemies with equal speed. Only 27, but he saw this Yamamoto mission as his shot. Fame, maybe even a political career after the war. The kind of guy who wanted his name in the history books, and honestly, with this mission, he just might get it. So, Lieutenant Rex Barber, not your typical hotshot American fighter jock. Picture a farm kid from nowhere, Oregon, grew up wrangling cows, then became an engineering student at Oregon State, and then boom, he's flying combat sorties by 1940. He wasn't in it for the glory like Lanier. Nope. Now, the guy was all about getting things done with zero fuss, super methodical, borderline obsessive. He'd line up the shot, calculate the angle, blast the enemy out of the sky. No dramatic barrel rolls, no showboating, just cold precision. At 25, he could see a dogfight in his head like some 3D chessboard. Guess that engineering training paid off, huh? Every move, every risk. He'd already run the numbers in his head before you could blink. Meanwhile, over at Lakunai Airfield, Admiral Yamamoto's reviewing his schedule inside a Mitsubishi G4M1 Type 1 bomber. Americans called it the Betty. On paper, this plane was a marvel. Could fly nearly 3,000 miles, but only because they basically skipped armor and self-sealing fuel tanks. In reality, it was a flying gas can. Japanese crews had this dark sense of humor about it. They called it hamaki, like a cigar, since it pretty much burst into flames if you sneezed at it. Still, for this mission, Yamamoto's got 6 Zero fighters babysitting him, so he's not exactly going solo. Now, Yamamoto himself, guy was a legend. Only 5'3", but you wouldn't mess with him. Born Isoroku Takano, adopted into the Yamamoto clan. Descended from samurai, dude just oozed gravitas. Lost 2 fingers in the Russo-Japanese War when a Russian shell exploded nearby. Didn't slow him down. Still crushed at poker, still wrote with a brush, still ran the show. Spent years in the States, too. Harvard grad, hitchhiked across the U.S., checked out Detroit, Texas oil, California aircraft plants, saw enough to know Japan couldn't actually win a real slugfest with America. He told everyone, "We can go wild for 6 months, but after that, game over." Anyway, the whole American plan here, it hinged on total radio silence and keeping the code-breaking super hush-hush. If the Japanese sniffed out that their codes were busted, they'd scrap the flight in a heartbeat. The codebreakers at Station Hypo, later Fleet Radio Unit Pacific, had been untangling JN-25 code variants since before Midway. They were getting scary good at it, sometimes recovering entire messages. But every time they acted on an intercept, risk went up that the Japanese would catch on. So Admiral Nimitz, Admiral Halsey, Rear Admiral Mitchell, and even FDR himself had to sign off on this Get Yamamoto mission. Planning was a team effort too. Major John Condon mapped out the flight plan first. Fuel, waypoints, the works. But Mitchell tossed it out, said it didn't fit what the P-38s could actually handle. So Mitchell and his pilots pulled an all-nighter, recalculating everything to squeeze out every bit of stealth and efficiency. They ended up with a crazy precise 5-leg route, all designed to slip past Japanese radar, dodge patrols, and adjust for wind and the Earth's magnetic weirdness. Intelligence was looking good. April 18th, exactly a year since the Doolittle Raid, so there was a little poetic justice in the timing. Weather was cooperating too, clouds for cover, but clear enough to fight. And best of all, the Japanese had no clue. Their radio chatter was business as usual, not a hint of suspicion. One last snag, the Zeros, the A6M3 model 32 wasn't a joke. It could outturn and outclimb the P-38 at most altitudes, maxed out at 336 mph, and had a turning circle tighter than your grandma's kitchen. If the Americans stumbled into a fight, they were definitely in for a scrap. The Zero pulled off its wild maneuvers by basically being built out of tinfoil and hope. Seriously, it weighed just 3,980 pounds. Compare that to the P-38's beefy 12,780. How did they get it so light? Well, they ditched almost everything that'd keep a pilot alive. No armor except for a single chunk of thick glass. And forget about self-sealing fuel tanks. That thing was a flying Zippo lighter just waiting for a spark. The frame was as thin as they could get away with. So in a close, low-altitude dogfight, the Zero could fly literal circles around the Lightning. But if things went vertical and fast, the P-38 would just rip right through it, guns blazing, thanks to its muscle and rugged build. Lieutenant Besby Frank Holmes spent his time in the Solomons obsessing over how Zeros fought. The Japanese pilots kept tight formation. Picture them hovering 1,000 to 1,500 feet above and behind their bombers, flying these little chains of three. Their playbook? As soon as enemy fighters showed up, the escorts turned to fight while the bombers just punched it and hoped their speed and guns would get them through. But American intel noticed something the Japanese probably wished they hadn't. If you surprised them, especially from below and behind, their reaction time got, well, embarrassingly slow. The trick was getting that surprise, even though you'd have to come at them across 600 miles of blue ocean with the sun beating down on you. Not exactly subtle. April 17th, 1943, briefing kicks off at 8 p.m. The ops tent is packed. Rear Admiral Mark Mitcher himself shows up. This guy's a legend, the same dude who commanded the Hornet during the Doolittle Raid, and a huge booster for naval air power. He's not there to hand out cookies. He knows this mission's huge. 18 P-38s are in. 4 will go straight for the bombers, killer flight style. 12 more run top cover, ready to tangle with whatever the Kahili airfield throws at them. Think like 750 Japanese fighters. 2 planes in reserve in case someone's bird craps out on takeoff. They pick the killers, Captain Lanier, Lieutenants Barber, Holmes, and Raymond K. Hine. Backups are Lieutenants James Mlanahan and Joe Moore. Mitch's navigation plan? Genius, but also desperate. He's got them skimming the waves at 30 to 50 feet, changing course 5 times, covering hundreds of miles, all while dodging Japanese outposts. If you screw up and drift just 1 degree off, you're lost at sea with not enough gas to find your way back. No pressure, right? Their survival gear? Honestly, it's not comforting. Mae West life vests. Sure, like that'll help with the sharks. Jungle kits with water tabs, rations, fishing line, basic first aid kit. Each guy's got a Colt 45 with extra mags. Why? Because getting caught by the Japanese now was basically a death sentence. The stories coming back were horrifying. Beheadings, experiments, cannibalism. So running out of fuel over the ocean meant sharks and sunburn. Crashing in Japanese territory, way, way worse. Lieutenant Colonel Luther S. Moore, weather guy, does a final check. Winds from the southeast at 8 knots on the surface, 15 knots from the south at 5,000 feet, 22 knots from the southwest at 10,000, but honestly, Solomon Islands weather is like rolling dice. It could be blue skies 1 minute, and then suddenly you're flying into a wall of storm clouds the next. The forecast says 70% chance of decent weather, but everyone knows that's just a guess. And radio, forget it. Absolute silence until they spot the enemy. The radios are tuned to 6710 kilocycles, supposedly safe from Japanese eavesdropping, but nobody's taking chances. For navigation, Mitch is going old school, dead reckoning, compass, airspeed, the clock, and a whole lot of mental math. No radio beacons, just nerves of steel and a lot of hope. Man, The Pacific just goes on forever, nothing but waves as far as the eye can see, with the odd island here or there. Not exactly a comforting place to get lost. And for these guys, one navigator had to nail it, or 18 planes would just vanish into all that blue. No pressure, right? Lieutenant Julius Jack Jacobson gave his guns a last once-over just in case. Each of the 4 Browning machine guns crammed into the nose of his P-38 was loaded with 500 rounds, regular bullets, some that lit up like the 4th of July, and armor piercers for good measure. Rate of fire? Ridiculous. Like, blink and you've burned through your ammo. The 20mm cannon, only 150 shells, but each one was basically a flying hand grenade. The P-38 could chew through a bomber's wing spar in seconds, but honestly, if you just mashed the triggers, you'd run dry in under a minute. Every shot had to matter. It was still dark on April 18th, but the ground crews were already busting their butts under spotlights, getting everything ready. Master Sergeant Leo B. Godfrey was on top of the ammo crews, making sure every belt was loaded right. Planes got topped off with 100-octane fuel, internal tanks full, drop tanks checked and rechecked. Guys were paranoid about those tanks. If a shackle jammed, you'd get stuck with dead weight and probably end up shark food. Oil, good. Hydraulics, check. Control surfaces, flap them around, make sure nothing's jammed. Meanwhile, over on the Japanese side, things were just as hectic. The 11th Air Fleet at Rabaul ran a tight ship, especially when it came to ferrying VIPs. Vice Admiral Kusaka, who was basically Yamamoto's right-hand man, argued that this whole inspection tour was a terrible idea. The Americans were everywhere, especially after the Japanese bailed on Guadalcanal. Reports said the Yanks had like 200 fighters buzzing around all the nearby islands. But Yamamoto, stubborn as ever, he insisted on showing up in person to congratulate the pilots for Operation I Go, even though the victories they claimed sounded, let's say, optimistic. The official tally was insane, like a whole fleet sunk. In reality, a handful of ships went down. Classic wartime math. Chief Petty Officer Hiroshi Hayashi was the guy making sure Yamamoto's Betty bomber, tail number 323, was ready to go. That plane had seen more action than most. 47 missions, and still ticking. They even yanked out the bomb bay to squeeze in more fuel. Yamamoto's seat was set up behind the pilot for the best view, and his centuries-old family sword had its own custom rack. Because, nothing says, I mean business, like bringing your ancestral katana on a flight. The escorts? Serious business. The 204th Air Group, real hotshots, all with more than 500 hours in the cockpit. Shoei Sugita was one of them. He'd rack up over 70 aerial kills before the war was done. Kenji Yanaga was another, 100 missions under his belt and honored to be guarding the big boss. These guys had tangled with just about every American plane out there. Below 15,000 feet, the lightning speed wasn't much help, and the Zero could dance circles around it. The Zeros figured if they kept things low and tight, they'd outturn and outclimb the P-38s. Just had to watch out for those nose guns. Back at Henderson Field, 7:25 in the morning, Mitchell's P-38 started rolling down the strip. The whole takeoff order was planned down to the second. No wasted fuel, no screwing around. Mitchell led, then his wingman, then the killer flight, then cover flights. But nothing ever goes perfectly. Lieutenant Mlanahan blew a tire and skidded off the runway. Plane trashed, but at least he walked away. Then Joe Moore's fuel transfer pump crapped out, so he had to turn back before even getting started. Just like that, they were down to 16 planes instead of 18. Not much room for mistakes now. Every little thing was going to count. Mitchell kept his birds skimming just above the water. 30, maybe 50 feet up, barely enough to keep the props dry, but low enough to dodge Japanese radar. Salt spray blasted up, gunking up the windshields in no time, so guys kept wiping them down, cursing under their breath. Nobody said a word on the radio, strictly eyeballs and trust, staying in tight formation, 2 hours and change, flying like that. It's the sort of thing that messes with your head, just water, water, more water, engines humming, hands twitching on the throttles, eyes flicking from dials to the horizon and back. You get a rhythm, almost trance-like. Some guys admitted later they nearly nodded off, had to slap themselves awake, or belt out a tune just to keep the cobwebs off. And man, the sun! It turned those cockpits into ovens. The slipstream helped a little, but not much. Lieutenant Roger Ames, he was in the cover flight, sweating bullets over his fuel gauge. Those drop tanks were sucking more gas than the math said they should. Maybe bolted on crooked, maybe just shoddy work. Either way, the numbers weren't lying. If things didn't change, he'd have maybe 5 minutes of fuel left after getting back. 5. That's nothing. And he knew it. Too much throttle on the way out and you're bobbing in the drink. Conserve too much and you won't have the juice to tangle if things get hot. So every guy was fiddling with his prop pitch and throttle, hunting for that perfect spot between guts and survival. The engines, Allison's, just droned on this steady, almost soothing sound until your mind started to wander somewhere dangerous. Meanwhile, across the water, 6 a.m. Tokyo time, Yamamoto himself was rolling out, full dress whites, medals gleaming, ready to impress the troops. Guy had a flair for showmanship, but they said he looked grim, like maybe he saw the writing on the wall. Vice Admiral Ugaki, his right-hand man, was riding in Betty Bomber 326, packed in with staffers. They climbed to 6,500 feet with the Zero escorts slotting in, 2 groups of 3, perfect symmetry. The sky was crystal, puffy clouds hanging around 4,000, 5,000 feet, enough to hide in if you needed it. Warrant Officer Kenji Yanaga, flying escort in 03081, was all nerves and muscle memory. That guy could spot a mosquito at a mile. 3 years of war had turned him into something just shy of psychic. But this morning, he was glued to his leader's wing, keeping it textbook tight. The route from Rabaul to Balale was practically routine. American fighters had never made it up this far in force. Truth is, everybody figured the biggest risk was some dumb mechanical failure, not a dogfight. 0934 local time, Mitchell's group hit their final nav point, right on the nose. 2 hours and 9 minutes of nothing but dead reckoning over blue nothingness. Mitchell checked his Elgin watch, did the mental math time to turn northwest for the intercept. If he'd botched the wind or compass, this whole thing would be a goose chase. He waggled his wings, signal to turn. 16 P-38s banked as one toward Bougainville. The timing, freakishly good. They were a minute early. After 410 miles of ocean with nothing but a compass and a hope, Mitchell's wingman, Doug Canning, spotted them first. Bogies, 11 o'clock high. First radio break of the flight, and it was the jackpot. 5 miles out, 6,000 feet above, 8 planes, perfect formation, right where the intel said they'd be. 2 Betty bombers, 6 Zeros, clueless about the 16 Lightnings sneaking up from below and behind. Mitchell didn't hesitate. Skin them tanks, all flights. Let's get them. Drop tanks tumbled away, splashing into the Pacific. Suddenly, the P-38s could breathe. Engines roared to war. Emergency power, 1,425 horses each. They blasted through 300 megamids, climbing hard, ready to pounce. So here's how it went down. The killer flight was supposed to take out the bombers, while Mitchell's guys, the cover flight, climbed higher to smack down any fighters scrambling from Kahili. Captain Lanier clocked the escort Zeros just as they started dropping their fuel tanks. Classic move, right? They'd spotted the P-38s and immediately peeled off to mix it up. Textbook Zero tactics. Their whole job, keep the bombers safe by cutting off the attackers. Now Lanier didn't stick with the plan. Instead of pushing on toward the bombers with Barber, he whipped around to go head-to-head with the Zeros. Split-second call, one that'd get armchair generals all riled up for decades. He claimed he just wanted to clear the way for Barber, let him go after the bombers without some Zero on his tail. The peanut gallery. They said he was chasing fighter kills for bragging rights, not the mission. Meanwhile, Barber just kept hammering toward the bombers, who were now in full panic dive for the jungle. The lead Betty nosed over hard, the pilot trying to hug the treetops, hoping the thick canopy would slow down the P-38s and maybe, just maybe, hide them. Barber shoved his Lightning into a steep 45-degree dive, airspeed jumping past 400 meters. The gap closed in a blink. 2,000 yards, 1,500, 1,000. At 500 yards, he let everything loose. 50 cal, machine guns, 20-meter cannon, the whole works. All that fire converged on the bomber's right engine and wing root. It was like flipping a switch. Boom! The engine went up in flames, wing nearly sheared off. The Betty rolled out of control. Barber yanked back hard, his P-38 shrieking in protest, barely dodging the burning wreck as it vanished into the trees. One black smoke column, one bomber down. But which one had Yamamoto? No way to tell. Barber started scanning for the second Betty. Holmes and Hine tried to follow Barber, but with all the chaos, got separated. Holmes spotted the other bomber hugging the coastline, barely skimming the waves. Ugaki's pilot went for the ocean instead of the jungle, maybe thinking the water would keep the fighters from diving under him. Holmes swung in to attack, but he was coming in too hot. He fired a long burst, tore up the Betty's right engine. Fuel and oil started streaming out, but he overshot before he could finish the job. Barber picked up the chase. The Betty was practically skimming the water, trailing smoke. Barber set up for a deflection shot, leading the target by 30 degrees. His first burst just kicked up water, but then, bam, he stitched rounds right through the fuselage. Bits of metal flew off, some even smacked his own P-38. The Betty's left engine caught fire. The pilot tried to ditch, but he hit the water, doing over 100. The plane busted apart, wings and fuselage separating. Up above, Lanier was in the thick of it with the Zeros pulling off some wild vertical scissors. The P-38s had the speed edge, but the Zeros could turn on a dime. Lanier said he bagged one, rolling inverted and blasting it apart. But Japanese records? Not so much. No Zeros lost, apparently. The rest of the Zeros, led by this guy Yanaga, decided not to chase glory, just chased off the Americans so they could maybe save a bomber or two. That didn't exactly work out. Mitchell and the top cover boys were waiting for the big swarm from Kahili, 750 fighters or something, but nobody showed. Maybe they were busy, or maybe they just didn't see it coming. Mitchell kept his altitude, ready to swoop if anyone tried to climb up at them, but nothing happened. Down below, the main attack was over, and the P-38s turned for home. The whole thing? You're less than 10 minutes. Real shooting. Maybe 3 minutes, tops. Whether it worked or not, all came down to which bomber Yamamoto was riding in. Barber's P-38 took a beating. 104 bullet holes, not kidding, yada. Hydraulic fluid leaking everywhere, reddish streaks down the fuselage, one engine running rough. Could have been debris, battle damage, who knows. But both engines held together, so Barber nursed the thing back home, eyes glued to the gauges, hoping the whole rig wouldn't quit on him before he made it. Every weird rattle or shake out there could mean your engine's about to quit, and you're 400 miles from anything but a very wet grave. The flight back? Pure stress test. Pilots were running on fumes, some literally. Holmes, poor guy, His engines started coughing, so he had to throttle back and got left behind. Radio chatter was kept to a minimum, everyone itching to break silence and yell for help. But nah, rules are rules. Each pilot stuck inside his own head, doing desperate math. Can I even make it home? Or am I sleeping with the fishes tonight? It was 16 cockpits, each living out their own anxiety-ridden math class from hell, closing in on the Russell Islands, still a couple 100 miles from safety. Some guys had to make calls that could kill them. Hines, his gauges were basically screaming empty. He could try for the Banneker emergency strip, but, oh yeah, Japanese subs like to hang out nearby, so rescue? Not exactly guaranteed. He said screw it, trusted his numbers, and just kept flying, hoping those Allison engines didn't pick that moment to throw a tantrum. Mitchell, meanwhile, nailed the navigation dead on. Slowly, the scattered P-38s limped back together. Guadalcanal finally showing up on the horizon, right where it was supposed to be. By noon, they spotted Fighter Strip 2. Some planes were running on pure hope and the fumes of yesterday's breakfast. Holmes landed with both engines sputtering out, tanks bone dry. Others slid in with 10 gallons or less. Like 3 minutes left before they'd have been swimming. The whole mission, all the drama, balanced on a couple gallons of gas, engines off, ground crews mobbed the planes, poking fingers through bullet holes, tallying up the damage. Everyone was thinking the same thing. Did we do it? Was Yamamoto really in one of those bombers? The pilots could only say 2 bombers got smoked, but in the chaos, nobody could confirm which was which. They had to wait. Japanese radio would tell the real story, eventually. That wait, agonizing. That night, Guadalcanal went dark and sticky. Pilots slumped in the officers' club. A Frankenstein's monster of scrap wood and captured enemy junk. Captain Lanfear, always ready for his close-up, started spinning his own action movie version. He'd shot down Yamamoto after some Top Gun move, rolling inverted, pulling the trigger upside down. According to him, he was everywhere at once, dogfighting Zeros, shooting bombers. Barber, more the strong, silent type, just shook his head and quietly explained how he went straight at the lead bomber and let loose. Next day, Japanese search parties found what was left of Yamamoto's plane tangled up in jungle 4 miles inland from Moore Point, near a little place called Aku. Lieutenant Commander Tabuchi Chagaru led the grim parade. They found Yamamoto thrown free but still strapped to his seat, white gloves still gripping his sword, looking weirdly statesmanlike for a dead guy. Dr. Tanaka's exam turned up 2 bullet wounds, one through the shoulder blade, out above the eye, another through the jaw. Dead in an instant, probably during Barber's first pass. The hit wrecked the Japanese Navy, honestly. Yamamoto wasn't just any admiral. He was the guy, the brains, the backbone, the one guy who actually got the Americans weren't to be underestimated. His loss left a hole nobody could fill. Captain Watanabe, one of the few survivors from the other bomber, later said it best. Yamamoto's death was the void that could never be filled. The night before, he'd played shogi with the admiral, who seemed weirdly resigned, like he knew his number was up. Japanese intelligence immediately smelled a rat. No way the Americans found Yamamoto by sheer luck. The timing, the precision, all of it screamed broken code. But admitting that would mean confessing to a disaster of their own, so they played it off. Official story: Yamamoto died in heroic, regular combat, not in an assassination. The Americans, for their part, kept it low-key at first, couldn't risk tipping their hand about the code breaking. If the Japanese had figured out their codes were busted, that whole edge the Americans had at Midway, and the fact they even bagged Yamamoto, would have gone up in smoke. Roosevelt got the news, kind of grimly pleased, but clamped down hard on any leaks. Absolute lockdown. Nimitz was sweating bullets over the idea that the press might blab and blow the whole code-breaking gig wide open. So, for more than a month, regular Americans had zero clue Yamamoto was toast, never mind that it was US pilots who'd done him in. But man, the drama started fast. The second those pilots landed, they were already bickering over who actually shot down Yamamoto. That beef, it pretty much wrecked friendships for ages. Captain Lanfear, always chasing headlines, went all in on his version. Every time he told the story, it got wilder. He even claimed he pulled some insane vertical flip, went upside down, and shot at the bomber from above. Like, sure, buddy. Only problem? Physics says nope. He'd have needed to teleport and break his own plane's limits. Lieutenant Barber's story? Lot more chill, and it actually matched the facts. He said he just tailed the lead bomber and went after it from behind, then took a shot at the second one. Japanese eyewitnesses, including one of the Zero pilots, backed up Barber's version. They only saw a single P-38 come in from behind and below, exactly like Barber described. Yamamoto's wounds and the bullet holes in the plane matched that angle too. Not from above, not some Top Gun nonsense, but the argument dragged on for decades, just poisoning the air between those guys. Then, in late 1943, Time magazine ran a piece naming Landfair, nearly screwing up operational security. Fast forward to 1991, the Air Force tried to smooth things over by giving both Landfair and Barber half a kill each. Political fudge job, and nobody was happy. Finally, in 2003, after digging through all the Japanese records, crash evidence, and people's memories, historians said, yeah, it was Barber. He did it solo. Major Mitchell, who actually led the whole op and did some wild navigation, seriously, he found a moving target after 600 miles of dead reckoning, was supposed to get the Medal of Honor, didn't happen, thanks to the usual military politics mess. He got the Navy Cross instead. Every pilot on the mission got the Navy Cross, which was cool, but Mitchell really deserved more. The nerdy technical side, Operation Vengeance changed how the US thought about fighters. The P-38 Lightning was basically the only American plane with the range, firepower, and speed to pull this off. Twin engines meant it could limp home, even banged up, and all that firepower packed up front just shredded whatever it hit. No way regular, single-engine fighters could have managed. These lessons ended up shaping future planes like the P-51D Mustang. Yamamoto's death? That was a gut punch for Japan's Navy. His replacement Koga just didn't have the same brains or charisma, and then he died in a crash less than a year later. After that, Japanese naval strategy was a mess. Just desperate stunts, not any kind of real plan. The grand showdown Yamamoto wanted, where they'd destroy the US carriers all at once, never happened. Instead, Japan's carrier force just got picked apart, especially at the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot and Leyte Gulf. And honestly, the psychological hit was massive, and Yamamoto had been hyped up as this unbeatable genius, almost like a myth. When he got hunted down and killed, it shattered that illusion. Morale in the Japanese military started circling the drain, and every loss after that made it worse. That victory disease they'd caught early in the war, gone, replaced by straight-up fatalism. One last kicker. The Japanese never really figured out how badly their codes were compromised. They made tiny tweaks, but nothing major. That blindness cost them big time, especially at the Philippine Sea, where US pilots just tore through Japanese naval air power in what everyone remembers as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Reading enemy intentions changed everything for the Americans. Suddenly, defense wasn't just digging in and hoping for the best. It was about luring the Japanese into traps, setting up ambushes that felt almost choreographed. But man, the price they paid. Yamamoto's death didn't just cost the Japanese their top guy. The Americans lost people too. Lieutenant Raymond Hine, poor guy, never came back from a later mission. Captain Lanier, he ditched the military after the war, went off chasing a life in politics and business, milking his supposed role in Yamamoto's killing, even though everyone kept arguing about what really happened. Lieutenant Barber stuck around, made it all the way to colonel by 61, and he was so damn humble he didn't even fight Lanier's version of the story till he was retired, and finally the actual evidence came out. Talk about patience. That mission, though, it was like a masterclass in teamwork you almost never saw in the Pacific. Nerdy codebreakers like Edwin Layton cracked the Japanese messages. Major John Condon from the Marines mapped out the plan. Army Air Force pilots actually flew the mission. Usually those branches bickered like siblings, but this time it clicked. That whole operation set the standard for how Americans would fight for the rest of the war, and honestly, it still echoes today. Yamamoto, he wasn't just any admiral. The guy actually got what America was capable of. He knew the US could crank out ships and planes like nobody's business. Remember his line? Something about running wild for 6 months, maybe a year. But after that, he had no confidence. He saw the writing on the wall, even if nobody else in Tokyo did. When he was gone, his replacements started believing all that spirit conquers all nonsense, ignoring basic reality, and that pretty much sped things up toward Japan losing the war. The date of the mission, April 18th, 1943, wasn't a coincidence either. Exactly a year after the Doolittle Raid smacked Tokyo, and now American fighters went right at Japan's top brass. The symbolism couldn't have been louder. No more safe zones for Japanese command. Roles flipped. The hunters got hunted. That freaked out the Japanese leadership. Suddenly, they're second-guessing, paranoid, hesitating. Big psychological win for the US. Technically, the whole thing was a nail-biter. The P-38s barely made it. Those planes limped home with tanks basically bone dry. If Yamamoto had been half an hour late, the Americans would have been flying in circles, running out of gas. Easy pickings. Success and disaster were separated by, a few gallons of fuel and maybe 10 minutes? Nuts. That's why they started pushing for longer-range fighters and better fuel setups. Weather? Oh, it was a crapshoot. Crystal clear at the intercept. Clouds hiding the guys on the way home. Perfect. But one big thunderstorm or a gust in the wrong direction, and the whole thing would have been called off. The pilots liked to joke. The weather gods were rooting for them that day. They probably weren't wrong. The Japanese tried to cover up Yamamoto's death for over a month, faking announcements in his name. When they finally admitted it, they went full ceremonial. A massive funeral, Emperor Hirohito showing up, which was unheard of. Thousands lining the streets. Dude was practically a legend. His ashes got split, some in Tokyo, some back home. As for the American pilots, it wasn't all high fives and backslaps. Most of them respected Yamamoto even if he was the enemy. He didn't even want that war in the first place. He just followed orders. And yeah, he planned Pearl Harbor, so by wartime logic, he was fair game. But still, the idea of targeted assassination sat heavy with some of them. Edwin Layton, the intel guy who pushed for the mission, actually knew Yamamoto from the old diplomatic scene in the 30s. He saw the guy as a realist, not a fanatic. Still, Layton knew taking him out would save American lives. Wars like that sometimes, no matter what you do, you end up carrying the weight. Man, this mission was basically a showcase for American tech flexing on every level. Code breakers cracked the enemy's secrets. No code, no shot. Long-range fighters, those P-38s, were the only birds in the toolbox that could even reach the target. Navigation? That was all. Mitchell, threading the needle over hundreds of miles of ocean with nothing but a compass, a clock, and nerves of steel. But look, gadgets don't win wars by themselves. You need people who know how to push them past the breaking point. Mitchell's dead-on navigation, Barber's freakish aim, the ground crews who kept those planes flying on little more than hope and spit, all of that was the real difference. It was the combo of human guts and machine muscle that kept the US ahead in the Pacific. And honestly, they barely pulled it off. If Canning hadn't spotted the Japanese when he did, the whole strike team might have flown right past. If Barber dropped off the chase, Yamamoto's plane disappears into the jungle, end of story. Holmes? He crippled the second bomber just enough for Barber to finish the job. Otherwise, survivors could have blown the whole code-breaking secret sky high. Every piece had to fit, and yeah, the chain held, but it was hanging by a thread. Dig into the squadron records, and it's all there, plain as day. Fuel gauges dipping into the red zone. These guys were running on fumes, saved by a lucky tailwind and some serious throttle finesse. Barber chewed through 70% of his ammo in 2 passes. The maintenance logs read like a shopping list of destruction. Those planes came home shot to hell. The Japanese didn't just roll over. Defensive fire was nasty in those few seconds of chaos. Then there's the aftermath. Killing Yamamoto, not just payback, it rewired the whole war. The guy was the only one in the Japanese command who really got that they couldn't outlast American factories. After he was gone, his replacements were all in on Hail Mary strategies. Kamikaze attacks. That's what you get when your playbook is empty and you're desperate. The war dragged on, more people died, all because the one guy who might have talked peace was gone. And talk about a weather miracle. April 18th, 1943, visibility for days, clouds scattered instead of blanketing the sky, winds doing exactly what the forecast said. You'd only get a window like that maybe once in 10 tries. If they'd waited, who knows when the next shot would come? People love to talk about pilots and dogfights, but the real heroes were the codebreakers, sweating in basements at Station Hypo. They worked in total secrecy, hunting for clues in endless strings of gibberish, and nobody even knew their names. The pilots might have pulled the trigger, but those code nerds handed them the loaded gun. When they finally found Yamamoto's crashed Betty bomber, the carnage told the story. The P-38's guns stitched a 30-inch wide kill zone right through the plane. Nothing survives that. Aluminum shredded, cables snapped, fuel spraying everywhere, everyone on board dead before they knew it. Not even the best armor could have saved them. The Zero escorts, they completely dropped the ball. Instead of sticking to the bombers, they peeled off to dogfight, just like their training said, which left the bombers wide open. Barber slipped through the gap, took the shot, and the rest is history. The Japanese never really learned to fix that, and American pilots kept picking them off the same way. Admiral Nimitz had to bet big on this one. If the mission tanked, the Japanese would know their codes were blown and change everything, plus the US could have lost planes and pilots for nothing. But Yamamoto was too valuable a target to pass up. Nimitz rolled the dice, and, well, the gamble paid off. The whole planning process? Classic American staff work. Plan B, Plan C, every angle covered. They mapped out the weather, measured fuel down to the last drop, crossed every T. That's what tipped the scales. Not just guts and luck, but brains and prep too. All right, let's drop the formal history lecture tone for a second. Here's how I see it. This whole thing, Operation Vengeance, was classic American style. Plan the hell out of it, but be ready to improvise when things go sideways. The code name itself? Yeah, that was all about channeling the anger from Pearl Harbor. But honestly, the guys actually flying those P-38s? They weren't out there for some Hollywood-style revenge fantasy. They just had a job to do, and they did it like pros. No dramatic speeches, no chest beating, just fly, fight, survive, repeat. The big gotcha moment, the revenge part, that was more for the folks back at HQ and the politicians who needed to sell it to the public. What's wild is how far the U.S. fighter crews had come in just a couple years. Early on, they could barely keep their bombers alive. By 43, they're diving deep into enemy airspace and pulling off crazy, complicated missions. That didn't just happen overnight. Better planes, better training, way more confidence after a few wins. It was a whole new vibe. But this mission was about more than just knocking out one admiral. It proved that leadership actually mattered, even in a war that was basically factories versus factories. If you had the right intel and the guts to use it, you could pull off some legendary stuff. Technology was great, but it still came down to the people behind the controls. That's a lesson the military kept relearning, from Vietnam to Iraq and beyond. Bottom line, Operation Vengeance was the U.S. at its sharpest. High-tech toys, smart planning, gutsy pilots, all working in sync. They got Yamamoto the mastermind and basically shattered any chance Japan had of negotiating a way out. Sure, the war dragged on for another couple years, but everyone kind of knew the ending was set after this. Picture it. April 18th, 1943, 18 pilots getting ready for a mission everyone thought was basically impossible. By sundown, Yamamoto's dead in the jungle, Japan's strategy is in shambles, and the Americans are on a straight path to victory. That intercept, still the longest fighter mission ever, was this freakish blend of genius planning, killer flying, and just plain dumb luck. Those 16 P-38s that limped back to Guadalcanal, they didn't just make history, they changed it. In a matter of minutes, they did what fleets of bombers and endless ammo couldn't do, wiped out a leader no one could replace. After that, the age of picking off enemy masterminds was officially on, and war would never be quite the same again.